Alright class, in the last video we left you off with talking about a person always wants to buy low, sell high. Well, whenever we start talking about these future contracts, we're going to begin to apply that mentality, apply that principle. And that's going to dictate whether or not we're going to be a buyer of a contract or a seller of a contract. Whether or not we're going to take a long position or a short position. But one thing that is always true in a futures contract is that the number of buyers must equal the number of sellers. Now remember, we're dealing with a contract here. And for you to be able to sell something, there must be a buyer on the other end. And for you to be a buyer of a commodity or a buyer of a contract, there must be a seller on the other end. So we know that the number of buyers must equal the number of sellers. Now, before we dive into that, I'm going to give you some terms. If you are a buyer of a futures contract, you are said to take the long position. They are going to be longing the market. So what would encourage a particular person to be a buyer of a commodity, of a futures contract? Well, if you're going to be buying, you're hoping that prices are actually going to go up. You're going to buy today with the hope that future prices actually go up to where you can sell it later at a higher price. And if you're going to do that, you're said to be longing the market. Now, if you're going to be a seller, you're going to take on the short position. The short position, they said that they are shorting the market. Now, a seller of a futures contract believes that the future price is actually going to go down. And if they believe that the future price of that commodity is going to go down and the futures contract price is going to go down, they are going to sell today at a high price and buy it back later at a low price. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But what you need to realize right now is the number of buyers, the number of long positions must equal the number of sellers and the number of short positions. Now, here's another interesting thing, that there is no specific buyer or seller that is obligated to each other. So what do I mean by that? You think about an actual contract that you deal with on a typical day-to-day basis. Let's say you have a contract between on a car loan or something of that nature. You signed a contract for that. That is between a specific buyer, you, and the specific seller, maybe the car dealer. That's not the case in a futures contract. Whenever you're dealing with a futures contract, you hold a contract in your hand that you can sell to anybody else. You can buy from anybody else. You're not obligated to one particular person. And you can buy and sell those contracts as you need to anybody that is willing to buy or sell. A person is allowed to buy or sell a contract at any time within the parameters of the specific contract. So these contracts, these future contracts, they're trying to estimate or put a price on a commodity some point in the future. Well, anytime that contract is in effect, it's currently going on, this person can buy and sell at any time. They don't have to wait till the end of the contract to buy or sell it or to get out of that contract. They can buy or sell at any time, and the buyers must equal the number of sellers. That is an absolute must. So you stop and think about that. If there was one more buyer than sellers, well, then you've got a buyer that's trying to buy something but can't buy from anybody. It doesn't work. So the buyers must always equal the sellers. So we talked about this time component, this time parameter up here. Well, let's go into a little bit more depth. So the time component are the expiration month of a contract. So let's say, for example, we have a contract that is for maybe March feeder cattle contract. Well, the March component, that's the expiration month, which means that that particular contract is set to expire in March. Or maybe it's an August corn contract or something of that nature. That's the expiration month. So this expiration month is the month at which the contract is no longer listed for trading. It comes off of the trading floor. It's no longer listed. And what's interesting is that we must end with 0 contracts for that trading period. So the participants, how do we end up with 0 contracts? We might have hundreds of thousands of commodity contracts set in play leading up until that final week or that final day of trading. So how do we get to where we have no contracts at the end? How do they just go away? Well, a participant buys a contract. If a participant buys a contract, they must sell that contract back before the end of that expiration month. They must. So if you're say a buyer, or you're taking the long position, and you decide you're going to take the long position today, for maybe it's a July contract. You take the long position today and you buy that contract today, you must sell it back before the end of the month. You must sell that contract back before the expiration month. So if everybody is buying and selling these contracts, if everybody who has bought a contract in the beginning sells it back later, and everybody who sold the contract in the beginning buys them back later, we wind up ending up with a zero sum, or zero contracts for that trading period. So basically what we're doing is we're cleaning up, we're clearing the house. We're going to buy and sell all of our contracts back. Now, we're basically buying and selling commodities. These future contracts are buying and selling commodities. That's really and truthfully what they are. You're selling a contract, or you're buying a contract saying, I agree to buy or to sell this specific amount of commodity on this particular day at this particular time. But before you actually have to deliver that commodity or actually pick up that commodity, guess what you do? You just buy a second contract to offset the first. So let's think about how that works. Let's say that I am a farmer and I'm looking to sell 50,000 bushels of corn, or maybe I'm a rancher and I'm selling 50,000 pounds of live animals. So I'm selling 50,000 pounds of live animals, and I go ahead and engage in a contract. I say that I'm going to go ahead and sell these animals. So let's say that I go ahead and short the market. So I short this market, and now it's time for me to actually deliver these 50,000 pounds. So I'm selling that contract. I say, all right, I agree to sell you this many cattle on this day at this time, but I don't want to actually have to haul my cattle from, say, Wyoming to Chicago, where I would have to deliver them. So what can I do? I'll just buy back that contract, or I'll buy another contract to offset the original one that I've already said I was going to fulfill. So guess what I do? I just buy back a contract, and that covers the amount that I'm going to sell, because I said I'm going to sell 50,000 pounds, but I'm going to go ahead and buy another contract to where I buy back 50,000 pounds to where my debt is wiped free and clear. So that's how it works in a nutshell of how we end up with zero contracts for that trading period. But what if there is physical delivery? There occasionally is physical delivery, although this rarely happens. If it happens, the quantity and the location is set in the contract. So if it's set up in the contract where I am a cattle seller and I'm supposed to deliver 50,000 pounds in Chicago, but yet I live in Wyoming, I probably don't want to do that. So it may not happen. I may never actually deliver any of these commodities. So who might actually be engaging and waiting out for physical delivery? Well, it might be grain merchandising firms, exporters, and processors, only whenever delivery is actually a good idea. Maybe there's a price advantage of short positions holders delivering rather than holding longer. Or maybe there might be a price advantage of a long position holder accepting delivery rather than buying somewhere else. There are rare cases where there is actually benefits to engaging in this physical delivery. But like I said, it rarely happens. Most of the time, a person who is going to sell a contract buys it back later, or somebody who buys a contract now sells it back later. So, what does it mean for a person to long the market or short the market? Remember that they're simply buying and selling contracts. So think about it this way of say a U.S. Treasury bond. You can hold that U.S. Treasury bond until it expires. Or what if you were told, no, you can't actually hold it out until it expires, but what if you could buy and sell it from other people? What if you bought this U.S. Treasury bond from somebody else? So you're going to buy it, you're going to long the market and buy that U.S. Treasury bond now. And then whenever it comes time when it's going to expire, guess what? You sell it later. You're buying and selling this contract, and this contract has an underlying physical component to it, a physical commodity tied to it. But essentially, whenever you're longing and shorting the market, you're buying and selling contracts for commodities. Kind of like what if you were going to be buying and selling the U.S. Treasury bond. There's a value tied to it, but you're not obligated to simply buy it just from the U.S. Treasury. You could buy it from an individual who's looking to sell a U.S. Treasury bond. And at the end of the day, you've got to either buy or sell or cash in that Treasury bond. And it comes out to basically this zero contracts for that particular trading period.